Tamsin Holt felt the car shiver under her boots as iron wheels cried against iron rails. She stood, gathering the life she owned, one scuffed trunk with a broken clasp, a canvas satchel with a tin of needles and threads, a slim ledger wrapped in oilcloth, and the letter that had tugged her across a continent. Her hands shook, and she told herself it was the vibration of the train, not fear, not the memory of how many times she'd counted the dollars stitched into the hem of her underskirt, each coin a hard little prayer against disaster. Outside the window, a town assembled itself from dust, a water tower leaning like a tired man, a false front mercantile with its painted letters already fading, a livery, a blacksmith shop with its mouth of anvil-bright fire, a church whose steeple was no taller than a cottonwood, and cutting the town clean in two, a street where the wind made whirlpools of grit and paper. Far beyond, the mountains kept their secrets in layered blues. Closer still, the land rolled out in tawny, thirsty grass that moved like the fur of some great sleeping animal when the breeze bothered to visit. She could not see the ocean she had left, could not hear cannon fire or factory whistles, but the quiet was somehow louder. Her throat felt full. She pressed the letter to it as if it might hold the bones of her voice together. Miss Tamsin Holt, the envelope said in its careful block hand, from E. Baird, proprietor, Baird and Sons Dry Goods, proprietor. Sons, the weight of words stacked like boxes in a storeroom. Opportunity, a roof, a life, Esperanza Creek, the conductor called, as if naming a promise he didn't believe in. The coach door stuttered open with a cough of dust. Tamsin moved with the others, miners numb with travel, a mother whose infant's wail had risen and fallen like a tide the entire journey, two sisters with hats like ship sails. The platform boards answered each footfall with a tired groan. Heat came up from the planks and through the soles of Tamsin's boots. It climbed her shins and laid its flat hand on her chest. She swallowed it, stood straighter, and found the face she had practiced in washhouse mirrors for months, calm, capable, plain, in a way that was difficult to argue with. Not the prettiest, not the cleverest, but useful as a well-tied knot. Miss Holt? She turned toward the voice and found a man of 40 with a storekeeper's belly and a triangle of sweat darkening the front of his vest. His moustache was a fenced garden around his mouth. He had the right number of pen nicks on his fingers and the right kind of careful look in his eyes. Ezekiel Baird. Mr. Baird, Tamsin said, and the words soaked her tongue like rain. It's good to meet you at last. He looked her up and down in a way that made the skin between her shoulder blades tighten. His gaze walked her like a fence line, searching for gaps. You're Miss Holt. He said it as if the name were an invoice he hadn't meant to receive. She offered her hand anyway. He took it the way a man takes a fish with a thorn in its mouth, quick and doubtful. Your letter said you'd have a room prepared, she said, and that the pastor would, yes, about that. He took a breath that inflated his vest and let it out through his nose like a horse considering a fence. Your agency's description gave me to understand. His eyes flicked to the trunk, to the darned cuffs of her dress, to the knuckles glossed by labor. You were of modest means. I am. Heat traveled up Tamsin's neck. She kept her voice level. But I cook, I sew, I can tally ledgers, I work. A man leaned against a post not 10 feet away, arms crossed, hat brim casting his eyes into shade. She was aware of him only as a shape, a vertical line in a town of squatter ones. The wind tugged one side of his coat open, and she saw the sweat-dark V of his shirt and the honest fade of a collar washed 100 times. He didn't move. He watched. Baird scrubbed at his moustache as if rearranging it might make her different. Modest means, he repeated. I took that to mean humble background, not, he gestured at her trunk as if it might contain smoke, not impoverished. The last word he forced through teeth, as if it offended the enamel. Tamsin's fingers tightened on the handle of her trunk. She heard her foster mother's voice as clearly as if the older woman had been standing beside her in the coal yard. If you flinch when someone tries to measure your worth, you've told them what scale to use. I paid my passage, Tamsin said. I pay my debts. You wrote you needed a wife who could keep a household, manage accounts, and conduct herself with sense. I'm that woman. He made a small sound, half scoff, half uneasy chuckle. Miss Holt, I manage a respected establishment. I've a certain position here. I had in mind a bride who might— He looked her plain dress in the eye, struggled for the word, landed on the one that wouldn't stain his tongue. Elevate. Climb, she said before she could stop herself. You wanted someone who could climb you. His eyes narrowed in a way that made her stomach turn. I wanted someone who wouldn't bring charity into my house, he said, sharply. Then, after a beat, more smoothly because men like him liked their cruelty ironed, you must understand, Miss Holt. One has responsibilities, appearances, there are expectations. She heard the carriage of the word expectations like an empty shelf rolling forward for stock it would never store. Expectations, she repeated, such as, but he was already stepping back. I'll speak to Pastor Riggs, he said, and wire the agency to arrange your return. The honorarium will be returned to me. Of course, I'll allow you the boarding house for a night. His gaze flicked again to her hem, and his mouth made the shape of a lemon. 2, if mercy compels. Her vision went narrow and white at the edges, like the world was a lamp turned too high. The boarding house, 2 nights. Mercy. He hadn't even asked about her journey, or the sister she had left in a Massachusetts mill with hands red from lye. He hadn't asked if she'd eaten. Sir, she said because her body remembered manners, even when her heart wanted to throw them. I crossed a continent on your word. I have no home to return to. I don't need mercy. I need a place. To work. Work, he echoed as if it were a small, unclean word. I'm not hiring, and certainly not Mr. Baird. The quiet voice came from the man in the shade. He did not uncross his arms. He did not shift his weight. He spoke as if words were a thing you shouldn't waste on people who would only use them against you. You've said enough. Baird turned, a front pulling his face tight. This is a private— Not on a public platform it isn't, the man said mildly. He turned his head toward Tamsin and tipped his hat in a way that neither mocked nor pitied. His eyes were grey, the blue kind that had been scrubbed out by sun and work, and in them was the first steadiness she had found since the train slowed. Ma'am, she managed something like a nod. Her throat felt like a door someone had beaten on from the inside and broken the latch of. You heard her say she paid her passage. The man finally pushed off the post. When he stood up straight, he seemed taller than the town. You heard her say she works. The thing you don't seem to be hearing is that she isn't a sack of flour for you to weigh and send back if it's not the right brand. Baird's face flushed an unbecoming shade. Rowan Lockridge, he said, as if naming the man were an insult. Always the hero when it costs you nothing. Rowan Lockridge. The name stitched itself into Tamsin's mind with a small, firm sound. It fit him. Simple, solid, like posts sunk in ground that knew hard winters. Rowan's mouth did not bother to smile. You needn't marry the lady, he said, but you weren't raised to send a woman back down a line without so much as seeing she's steady on her feet. I was raised, Baird said, to see, to my own, to mind what will be said at table. Then I hope whoever sits at yours has the appetite for shame. Rowan's gaze flicked once, deliberate and slow, over the men on the platform. Several pretended to find their boots interesting. Miss Holt, he added, turning back to her, the boarding house will take you if I vouch the fee. If you need work to pay it, my ranch could use hands that know one end of a ledger from the other and the difference between a scalded milk and a spoiled one. Tamsin kept her head up, because if she let it drop now, it would never come back. Up again. Thank you, she said carefully. I don't take charity. It isn't charity if you push a plough for it. She weighed the pride that had got her across this country against the survival that would keep her here. Then I'll work, she said, for the fee, for the week, until I can pay my passage back myself. Or forward, Rowan said. His eyes held hers for a beat longer than courtesy required, steady, unhungry, and then he looked away, as if to give her time to choose without someone watching the scale. It's your call. Forward, she said, surprising herself with the force of it. The word left her mouth and seemed to hover in the hot air between them, something alive with its own wings. Baird sniffed, as if the air had gone stale. You'll regret this, Lockridge, he said, gathering his offence like a cloak. Attaching yourself to refuse never made a man respectable. Rowan's eyes did not change. There's nothing respectable about a man who doesn't know where his courage is, he said softly, and Baird flinched as if he'd been touched where a bruise hid. The boarding house had curtains like eyelids and smelled of carbolic and boiled cabbage. The proprietress was a widow named Hester Cottingham, with a jaw that could cut rope and a kindness that hid under bark. She took Rowan's cash with the stunning efficiency of someone who had had to learn what money looked like when it left a room and did not return. She took Tamsin's trunk with a sigh and a glance that measured the girl and did not find her wanting, only thin. You carry that ledger like a Bible, Hester said, leading them up a narrow stair whose carpet had the memory of roses in it. That good or bad? Depends who's praying, Tamsin said. She had not meant to be funny, but the widow's mouth twitched, and the very small thing warmed her ribs. Room's simple, Hester said, opening onto a bed that was mostly iron and a washstand that had once been 2 chairs. If you make trouble, make it quiet. If you cry, do it into the basin so it's easy to empty. I don't, Tamsin began. Everyone does, Hester said, even the ones who think they don't. There's bread and coffee on the back. Table, you sit and eat both, miss. Halt! Tamsin heard how the T and the H clicked together like 2 flints trying for a spark. Tamsin, eat, Hester repeated, and left them with as much ceremony as a room leaves a broom. When the door shut, the quiet felt like a blanket thrown over a birdcage. Tamsin did not know what to do with her hands now that she didn't have to hold herself upright by them. She tried to set the trunk by the bed and nearly dropped it. Rowan stepped in without comment and took the weight as if it weighed no more than the words she had carried across states. You can leave it, she said, clumsy with gratitude she didn't know how to fit her mouth to. I know a man who owes me a favor, he said instead, as if saving her from the embarrassment of thanks. He needs a book hand 2 days a week. You'll be paid for columns more than for calluses. My foreman, Harlan Pike, will show you the rest of it if you take the ranch work. He's honest. He won't soften the edges for you because they can't be softened. Her fingers went to the rigging of her dress, pinched the seams she had, restitched 3 times. Why are you doing this? She asked. It came out blunt. The question had been sitting in her like an undigested stone, and it was either spit it or choke. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe. The room arranged itself around the line he made, because I was raised to know the difference between a person and a problem, he said. Because I watched a man I don't think you want to marry make you into the second one. And because I have work that needs doing, and you look like work is a language you speak. She was surprised at the relief that passed through her, a small steadying that moved her ribs in and out again like bellows. I do, she said. Speak it. Then we understand each other. He tipped his hat again. You'll be safe here tonight. I'll send Harlan for you at first light. Mr. Lockridge. She stopped him at the door. I'll pay the boarding fee back, every dollar, and your man's time for fetching me, and... There were too many ands. She made herself stop. Before her humiliation turned into a bouquet she was handing him. You do what you said, Rowan said. You work, the rest we'll sort. He left with the quiet way of a man who had learned that whole rooms listen when loud men talk. The boards settled. Tamsin put her hands flat on the washstand, like a woman convinced the water would bruise if she touched it wrong. She watched her face in the glass. She did not look ruined. She did not even look particularly surprised. She looked like a person who had been told to turn back and had realized there was no such direction on her compass. She ate bread that tasted of patience and coffee that tasted like waking up inside a tree. Then she slept for 13 minutes. She counted because she could not keep herself from counting, and woke when her heart kicked her ribs as if to get out. She put the letter from Baird in the basin and struck a match. The flame walked the paper like an old friend and left it in curls and black flowers. She washed the ashes down with water that ran clean over them, and this too felt like a kind of ledger made even. He arrived at dawn, with the sound of a man who had been up since before it, and wasn't impressed by it. Harlan Pike knocked. Once, as if to prove he could have knocked a second time if he'd had to. When Tamsin opened the door, he ran his eyes over her in a way that measured usefulness rather than beauty, and nodded a single nod. "Miss Holt, Mr. Pike. Coffee, please." "Good. You can make it when we get there. We ride modest. You got a skirt you don't mind teaching dust to?" She glanced down at her dress. The dust had introduced itself yesterday. "I've got a needle." He grunted something that might have been approval. On the street, the town unrolled its morning. A boy stacking crates by the mercantile, a woman throwing dishwater that surprised a cat, a drunk discovering that sleeping on the boardwalk meant waking with splinters in his cheek. Ezekiel Baird stood in the doorway of his shop with a ledger under his arm like a small shield. He didn't look toward her or pretended he didn't. His moustache was perfect. Tamsin kept her eyes on the horse Harlan offered, a sorrel mare with a crease down her nose like someone had folded her. The saddle was scarred in the right places and oiled in the right others. Tamsin swung up, felt the animal's life funnel into her through the stirrups. For a breath, the world steadied. They rode out under a sky that had been set to an impossible blue and left that way on purpose. The land widened into itself. Fences stitched it into sense where water permitted. Elsewhere, the grass grew tall and brittle, and the wind combed it backward. Harlan did not talk, which was a relief. When he did, it was to point with his chin at something that mattered. That draw floods fast if rain comes out of the west. Those clouds that look like they're balled up wool mean heat that breaks wrong. That arroyo's a good place for cats. Cats? Tamsin asked, not because she didn't know, but because his stories were a map and she wanted to walk her finger along them. "The kind with opinions about sheep," he said, and for the first time almost smiled. Cougars. The ranch appeared not as a single thing, but as a patience of them, a rail fence that had been repaired more times than it had been replaced, a whitewashed house whose paint had given up above the first-floor windows and retreated to the shade. Of the porch, a line of poplars acting like a windbreak because someone had told them once that was their job, and they had believed it. The barn was big enough to have its own weather. Chickens moved like commas through the margin of the yard. A dog with eyebrows made of seriousness came to meet them, and after investigation accepted Tamsin as a new sentence that did not ruin the paragraph. Rowan Lockridge came out of the barn wiping his hands on a rag that had once had a colour and now had history. He had the look of a man who did the thing he asked other men to do and found no poem in it but did it anyway. When he smiled, which he did not do now, Tamsin suspected it would be a thing you felt in the floorboards. "You made it," he said. The words warmed her like the first foot of a hearth on a winter morning. He took the mare's bridle and eased the bit out, and the gentleness of it made something in Tamsin's chest go loose. Men's hands had been many things in her life. Gentle was rare as rain that did not come with hail. "I can make coffee," she said. "And a list. I make very good lists." "Good," he said. He turned to Harlan. "We'll need both." Work found her hands as easily as if it had been waiting for them. Alma Gutierrez, who kept the kitchen like a ship, and the men who came through it like sailors, who needed remembering what kind of crew they were, showed Tamsin where the flour lived and where the weevils preferred to die, and how to make a pan. Sing with fat before it scalded you with smoke. "Men think biscuits are magic," she said, evaluating Tamsin's first batch, as if it had personally insulted her mother. "They are not. They are patience and cold butter, and not talking while you cut." "I can be very quiet," Tamsin said. "I can see that," Alma said, her mouth pursed with something like approval. "But quiet women still have thoughts. Put the right ones in the biscuits, and they will rise." By noon, Tamsin's shoulders were a kind of ache that felt almost like a friend, the good hurt of usefulness. She had scrubbed a table smooth enough to see herself in its boards. She had counted sacks and recorded their tally in a hand that stayed straight, even when the numbers wanted to wobble. She had mended a shirt Harlan had been pretending to throw away for 6 months. The men ate what she and Alma made and said the things men say when they don't know where gratitude lives in their mouths. The dog with the eyebrows put his chin on Tamsin's knee, and when she scratched the place starved dogs love to be scratched. He closed his eyes and became a prayer. In the afternoon, Rowan asked her to ride out with him to the east pasture and count the yearlings for a sale Rowan had been trying not to make. The sky had softened by then, the heat thinking about letting itself go for the day. The grass brushed the horses' bellies and spoke softly in a language Tamsin felt in her ankles. "Baird will make it hard for you in town," Rowan said finally, when the silence had stretched to the place where the edges of it turned from comfortable to something else. "He's got a sister with a mouth that stands on a stool so everyone can hear it. He's got money in the bank and the kind of religion that believes itself a mirror. He sends for things and is shocked when they arrive with their own souls." Tamsin watched the herd, the lifting and lowering of heads, the small bursts of dust that made the air taste like pennies. "He'll talk," she said, "and it will be useful to hear what it sounds like when a man speaks without kindness. Then later, I won't mistake the tune." Rowan glanced over, the flint in his eyes. Through a flash. "You always sound like that?" "Like what?" "Like you write the world down as it happens and then say it back to see if it holds." She thought about denying it. Instead, she said, "It's how my mind stands up." "Keep it standing," he said. "There's a man named Benton Lasker who believes water should be a thing that answers to him. He doesn't like me because the creek doesn't like him, and it likes me a little more than it likes most, because you don't ask it to be what it isn't," Tamsin said. The words arrived in her mouth before she had fully thought them. Rowan's mouth did that not quite smile again, the kind that put warm into cold places. "Maybe." He pointed with his chin toward a line of cottonwoods in the distance. "He and Ezekiel Baird break bread on Wednesdays. If they offer you kindness, look under it for strings." "You think they'll try?" she asked. "I think you humiliated a man who thinks women come into the world to polish his name. Such men don't heal right. They make scabs and pick them." The counting went in Tamsin's mind. 1, 2, 3, this one with white at the lip, that one with a scar laid into its hide by something that didn't mean it kindness. She felt the number settle. 87, she said, one limping in the right hind, 2 with coughs, one that looks like it's planning to learn a fence the hard way. Rowan did not argue. He only nodded as if the numbers were stones. In a pocket he'd trusted her to fill. "We'll keep the limper down near the home lot. Coffers go in the far corral until we know they aren't sharing with the whole town." They turned for home as the sun was drawing a knife along the ridge, making everything red where it cut. The day exhaled. Tamsin felt the exhale move through her, the way a woman feels the sea when she stands with her feet in it, that pull. She wanted to be frightened by the wanting, by the way this place had already begun to shape itself around her like hands. but she was too tired to be anything but honest with herself. She liked the work. She liked the way Rowan did not stand between her and difficulty as if she might break on it, but stood beside her as if he expected her to push. The letter came the next morning, shoved under the kitchen door with the kind of judgment that makes even paper smell like old bread. Alma found it and slapped it on the table the way women slap a fly. "For you," she said. "It's got the stink of the mercantile." Tamsin broke the seal. The ink smelled like vinegar and pride. The words were careful the way men are careful when they think God is nodding along while they write them. "Miss Holt, upon review of your circumstances, Baird and Sons cannot in good faith proceed with the agreement. Pastor Riggs agrees that a return to your place of origin is advisable. The agency has been notified. A charge of $14.75 for the return passage will, of course, be billed to you directly. E. Baird." She stared at the number until it was no longer ink but a weight hung from her ribs. $14.75. She could feel the coin stitched into her hem like a small hot secret. $2.30. A needle case with another. 87 cents hidden in its lining. "I'll pay it," she said aloud, though no one had asked her to. "I'll pay every cent, and then I'll buy a pair of boots with soles that don't wobble when you look at them." Alma's eyes were sharp enough to cut wheat. "First you buy a bed that doesn't make a noise like a bad marriage when you turn over. Then you buy the boots." She tapped the letter. "You'll sell him his number back in soap and biscuits and whatever else you can make clean." "What if people won't buy?" Tamsin asked, hearing too much of herself in the question. "What if Baird tells them not to?" "People tell themselves not to buy until the thing is good enough to make them liars," Alma said. "Make a thing that good." At the sink, Tamsin washed carrots with more force than carrots deserved. She wanted to cry. She wanted to punch Ezekiel Baird's ledger until the columns bled. She wanted to sleep for a week and wake up to a life that had this part done already. She did none of those things. She counted the cash in her head and the hours in the day and the price of tallow and lye and scent. She counted. And when the numbers began to align into something that looked like hope, she dried her hands and found Rowan by the barn. "I can make soap," she said. "At first, out of what we already waste, and candles, and a balm for cracked hands with rendered tallow and wild sweetgrass. I can stitch aprons with pockets in the right places and sell them at market." He squinted into the light, as if the sun might have hidden an answer there. "Market's Saturday. You'll have 2 days." "I have 2 hands," she said, "and a head that knows how to stack time, that almost smile again, like sun through old glass. Harlan'll go with you to the creek for sweetgrass. Don't go alone. If Vlaska's boys are running fence on the wrong side of right, I'd rather they saw a man with you." "I don't need a man to walk," she said, before she could help it. "I know," he said, "but sometimes it's useful to have one. To block wind," she didn't argue. There were winds a body could anchor against and winds that needed more canvas. The creek talked to itself in a language made by rocks. Tamsin knelt and ran her fingers through the green, the long blades. Slick at their roots, she cut cleanly, the way the Mexican women in the town of her childhood had shown her with yerbas and onion scapes, leaving the plant enough to become itself again. Harlan watched the cottonwoods more than he watched her. "You always this quiet?" he asked finally, as if the question had been chewing on his boot and he'd only just noticed. "I'm listening," she said. "To what?" "To what I'm cutting. To the way the water changes right before a snake moves. To your horse deciding whether he likes the man coming down the bank." Harlan straightened. "What man?" "The one whose spurs don't match," she said, and then stood, so she would not be at anyone's feet. 3 men came out of the cottonwoods as if they had grown there in the night. The one in the middle wore a vest like a verdict, and a smile made of teeth that had never learned to be sorry. His spurs did not match, one rowel clean, the other bent. The man on the right had a scar on his chin that looked like the punctuation at the end of a sentence he had not yet finished. The third wore his hat too low, the way cowards do when they believe shade will make them braver. "Morning," the centreman said. "Collecting our grass." "It didn't have your name on it," Tamsin said, hands loose at her sides. She could feel her pulse in her fingers, but she made them stay calm. "It's on the land our boss means to own." The man spat. The spit hit a rock and ran away from itself. "Soon as his water makes your boss's land thirsty." Harlan's voice was even. "Benton Lasker's water ain't the kind a man can drink without it burning him," he said. "You boys want to tell him that from me?" The smile went out of the man's teeth. "You Lockridge's shadow?" he asked Harlan. "We were wondering what shape loyalty wore on him these days." "Loyalty," Harlan said, "wears the same shape. As a spine." Tamsin felt the moment tip. The Scar-Chin man shifted his weight the way men do when they've decided to like their gun more than their life. She stepped forward before he could finish the thought. "Gentlemen," she said, not because they were, but because the word sometimes called men back from the cliff they were running toward. "We're taking grass. If you feel moved to report it, name me the thief." She lifted her chin. Tamsin Holt. Scar-Chin looked at her then, really looked, the way a man does when a thing he meant to move around suddenly insists on being in his path. "You the bride Baird sent back?" he asked, astonished delight washing his words. "No," she said calmly. "I'm the woman who decided whether she would stay and told a man no. There's a difference." "Same difference," he smirked. "You don't belong." He was close now, that dangerous close where a hand can happen without a thought. His fingers twitched. Harlan said her name, once, in a tone that was less a warning than a receipt. She felt what he meant, that there are moments when you can spend yourself and get interest back, and others where all you do is go broke. She tempered herself. "We have what we came for," she said softly, "and I have bread to bake." They backed away, not retreating exactly, but not making more trouble either. The man with the mismatched spurs looked at her with a curiosity that could become boredom or cruelty, depending on weather and orders. "Tell Benton," Harlan said, "that if he wants to lose a finger, he should keep putting his hand in Rowan. Lockridge's water. We'll tell him," the man said. He tilted his head. "And we'll tell him about you." He let his eyes travel her a little, and Tamsin felt the old heat, the kind that comes from shame you didn't earn, try to rise. She didn't let it. She looked directly back, not angry, not scared, just there. It made his smile find something else to do. On the ride back, Harlan let the silence live a while before breaking it. "You see the way the water jumped just there?" he asked, pointing to a riffle they'd crossed. "That's what it does when a snake's thinking about religion." "I saw it," she said. "You see the way men jump right before they learn how light moves through them? I saw that too." He grunted. "You ain't going to be easy to run off." "I've been run off before," she said. "I know what it feels like. And I know what it feels like to turn around and decide not to keep going." "Good," Harlan said. "We'll need that." They worked until the sun put its hand on their shoulders and said, "Enough." Soap became bars, and bars became stacks that looked like currency if you didn't look too hard and breathe too close. Alma guarded the cooling trays like a priest. "Men will cut into them early if you let them," she said. "They think everything is theirs by right of wanting it." At dusk, Rowan found Tamsin on the porch steps with a bowl of peelings and a knife that had learned her hand quickly. The light made gold out of dust. His hat was pushed back enough for her to see the place his hair had been trying not to grey and had failed with dignity. "You did a day's work twice," he said. "I'll have to find you a third, or you'll get lazy." She smiled without meaning to. It felt strange on her mouth and good in her skin. "I have a ledger to balance," she said, nodding toward the book at her feet. "Baird sent me a bill." "I heard," he said. "Half the town heard before breakfast." He made, "Je." I'll pay it, she repeated, I know. He sat beside her, not so close she could feel his heat, not so far she couldn't. He looked out at the yard, at the path men had worn from house to barn, until it was a second thought in the ground. You can stay past Saturday if you want, whether your ledger says you should or not. She ran her thumb over a softening carrot and thought about what it would mean to choose a place that had not chosen her first. There's a difference, she said slowly, between wanting and being wanted. I know that too, he said, so quietly she might have imagined the words. Sometimes the difference is just time. The wind moved and brought with it the smell of rain that had not yet been born. Tamsin felt it like a promise that might keep itself. She was not a fool. She did not mistake a man's kindness for the currency of forever. But there was something here. Work that respected its doers, a house that had been repaired more than replaced, a dog that trusted her hands, a man who watched the horizon like a man reads the future, wary, patient, unwilling to pretend it is what it isn't. She took a breath that went all the way down and stayed. Saturday dawned with a kind of brightness that felt like a dare. Tamsin loaded Alma's biscuits, each one a small moon, with a crust like a good story, and 3 dozen bars of soap into crates Harlan had built from boards that had lived a previous life as something that broke. She tucked the balm tins into her satchel. She wrapped everything in paper and string like gifts she could not yet afford to give herself. Keep your chin where it belongs, Alma said, pinning Tamsin's hat with a handful of ruthless sticks. If anyone asks about the price, tell them the truth and add a nickel. Alma, Rowan said mildly from the doorway, you trying to make her enemies? I'm trying to make her a living, Alma said. Enemies come free. Rowan's eyes went to Tamsin then, and there was a question in them she felt with the part of her that had once stolen bread and once returned it. I'll be there by noon, he said. Got a gate to fix that thinks it's a door. Harlan'll set you up. I'll be fine, Tamsin said. All I have to do is sell and not swallow my tongue. You'll be more than fine, Alma muttered. You'll remind a town that women keep it from falling against itself when men forget where their edges are. She pressed a paper packet into Tamsin's hand. For luck. Inside were 3 pinches of salt and a coin so thin, with use, it had almost forgotten it was a coin. The market smelled like sugar and horses and lies. Tamsin claimed a table at the far end, where the boards sloped down toward the creek, and spread her wares with unashamed care. She wrote her prices in a hand that made even miserly men trust numbers. Soap, 10C, or 3 for 25C. Balm, 7C, heals fishers in skin, not in men. Biscuits, 2C, each, but worth more. The first woman who stopped wore independence like a ribbon. She touched a bar of soap and lifted her eyebrows. Smells like a day I'd like to live in twice, she said. Who made it? I did, Tamsin said. The woman bought 3 because she had already decided to and did not want to be talked out of it. Then a girl with flour on her sleeve bought balm for her mother's hands, and an old man with fingernails like barn doors bought a biscuit, then another for the dog that shadowed him. The day unfurled. Money made the small, cheerful sound of agreeing to be counted. They came too, the looks and the whispers. That's her, someone said, as if they were showing her to themselves. The one the storeman turned back. She's making soap, someone else said, disappointment held like a penny. I expected, I don't know, more. Soap is more, the ribboned woman said dryly, and bought another bar. Just before noon, when the sun had decided to sit on people and see what happened, a shadow fell over the table. Tamsin didn't have to look up to know whose it was. The smell of expensive cologne that always thought it had more friends than it did told her. Miss Holt, Ezekiel Baird said. He sounded like a hymn, sung with all the wrong notes on purpose. I see you found industry. I found work, Tamsin said. She put a coin in the cigar box and stacked change with fingers that did not tremble. "It suits me. With Lockridge," he said. He made the name taste like something he'd kept too long in the sun. "Of course." "Of course," Tamsin agreed, light as a shawl. "He pays on time." Baird's moustache twitched. "I've taken the liberty of speaking with Pastor Riggs," he said, loud enough to be overheard, as such men always are. "He agrees a woman alone is a temptation to gossip. He'll be happy to arrange a situation." "Like the one you arranged?" Tamsin asked, before she could remember the benefit of biting one's tongue. "Where a woman arrives tired and hopeful and is sent to count her coins in a basin while her bill grows." A circle had formed, the way circles do when a fire starts and no one is sure yet whether to warm their hands or fetch water. Baird's colour went unbecoming again. "You misunderstand," he said, the words polished like pew wood. "We must all guard the tone of our town. There are standards. You have a past that suggests need." His gaze moved like a mouse along the hem of her skirt, seeking crumbs. "Charity is available, Mr. Baird," Rowan said. He had arrived without her seeing him. The weight of him settled the air. "If you intend to discuss charity, I suggest you begin by handing back what you have been hoarding." "I don't know what you mean," Baird said, but his eyes flicked. To the banker, Caleb Stroud, who had materialized like mildew at his shoulder. "You and Stroud have been holding remitted passage fees," Rowan said softly, "on the grounds that you were examining their propriety for safety. And while you were examining, you used the money. The words were stones placed in a road. Repay it." Stroud's brows went up as if they had been lifted by strings from heaven. "Unfounded," he said smoothly. "Those funds are unavailable," Tamsin finished. Her voice had found a cool place inside her to come from, "and will remain so, unless the woman you took them from can be made to look like the sort of woman who should never have had them." "The sheriff might be interested," Rowan said, "in the difference between a loan and theft." "Careful," Stroud murmured. "Allegations like that make enemies." Rowan considered him. "Then we've named the thing correctly." The crowd hummed. Heat made men say things they thought were wise. Before any of them could, a rider came in fast from the livery end, dust streaming like a banner. He leaned down to the sheriff and murmured. The sheriff looked up and Tamsin saw something move across his face like a cloud. Worry, then calculation, then relief that felt like cowardice. "Folks," he called, lifting his hands as if he'd caught a dove and wanted everyone to admire it. "There's been an incident east of town. Fire out by the Lockridge sluice. Men needed to help contain." Rowan's eyes went to Tamsin, then to Harlan, who had drifted to her shoulder like a second spine. "Go," Tamsin said. "I can sell soap without you. Bring back the water." "Stay put," Harlan told her, and was gone. Rowan hesitated for the length of a blink, as if it were possible to leave some part of himself to stand at her shoulder. Then he swung into the saddle and rode hard. The moment he was gone, the crowd's shape reformed around Baird's confidence like metal around a magnet. "Miss Holt," Stroud said pleasantly, "you've acquired debts. The law frowns on vagrancy if you cannot demonstrate respectable support." His eyes slid to Baird. "The pastor suggests a remedy." "A remedy," she repeated. "An arrangement, a situation." She kept her face composed the way one keeps a tablecloth from blowing off a table by keeping both hands on it. "No, it isn't a question," Baird said low now. "We've sent the wire already. The agency agrees you'll be placed in service until your debts are cleared. A good Christian town cannot be expected to foot the bill for a woman who brings nothing with her but work and the reminder of it." Anger rose in Tamsin so clean it almost smelled vacuumed. She wanted to scream. She wanted to climb on the table and divide the crowd with words. Instead, she reached into her satchel and laid the oilcloth-wrapped ledger on the boards. She untied it slowly, The way a woman unties a ribbon on a gift she intends to return. She opened to a page already ruled and ready. "Name your amounts," she said. "Each one. I'll write them. And then I'll write what I sell, and what I owe, and how it changes. And when the sheriff comes back from the fire, he can read aloud the difference between a woman paying as she goes and a man who calls debt charity so he can feel superior while he skins it." "You impertinent," Baird began. But a woman. Next to him, Hester, the boarding-house widow, said calmly, "I'll buy 6 bars." She put down coins the way a person lays down cards when she already knows she's holding the hand that wins. "And I'll buy them again next Saturday if I like my bath any better than I did last week." "See?" Tamsin said, her voice steady. "The ledger moves." She wrote, "Sold 6 bars 60C." She wrote, "Debt 1475." She wrote, "Balance 1415. This is how a woman pays. If you interfere," she added, looking at Stroud, "the sheriff can hear about your definitions." Stroud's mouth tightened. Baird's moustache bristled like a cat deciding whether to bite. A shout rose from the East Road. Men were returning. In a wash of heat and ash, the smell of wet char rode ahead of them. Tamsin searched for Rowan and found him in the center of himself, soot on his jaw, water comets streaked down his sleeves. He swung down before the horse had fully stopped and came toward her fast. Relief buckled her knees before she remembered how to lock them. "Contained?" she asked. "For now." He wiped an arm across his face and left a clean stripe like the first cut of a plow. "It wasn't an accident." His eyes went to Stroud and then to Baird. He did not need to say the name Lasker. It stood in the space with them like a fourth man. "Mr. Lockridge," the sheriff said, arriving red-faced and official. "There was a simultaneous issue in town. Miss Holt here is paying what she owes," Tamsin said quickly. "And selling, and recording, and being harassed," Hester added. She folded her arms and turned her jaw into a weapon. "By men who seem to think the word pastor makes them taller." The sheriff's eyes darted. He had the look of a man who wanted to be good in a town where it was cheaper to be liked. He opened his mouth. He did not get to shape what came next. Something cracked the air like dry lightning. Rowan moved before the sound finished being itself. He hit Tamsin's shoulder and threw her down behind the table. A second report came, and a plate shattered where her head had been. For a heartbeat, the market stopped being a market and became a thicket of panic. Harlan was already pushing through the press toward the line of rooftops across the street. "Down," Rowan said, voice low and very close. His body was a shelter without asking permission to be. She could feel the hammer of his heart through. The plank between them and her own answering it. Baird yelled something that sounded like assassin and lawless element. But the words were a barn fire asking to be thanked for its heat. The sheriff drew his gun and waved it, which was almost worse than not having one. Stroud crouched behind a post with the speed of a man who had rehearsed hiding and wanted to perform it well. Another shot. A woman screamed, high and thin. A jar of balm exploded into shining fat. Tamsin felt something sting her forearm and looked down to see 2 neat pearls of blood rising like regret. She could smell the shot. She could taste it. Metal and old pennies and the damp wood of a dock. Rowan raised up just enough to see and winced. "Rooftop over the harness shop," he said to nobody and everybody. "Angle's wrong for the livery. Harlan!" "On it!" Harlan's voice returned, distant and specific. He was already climbing the far side, where the crowd thinned into alley. The next report didn't come. Silence may be louder than sound when a crowd has taught itself to brace for it. Men began to move in the way of men who have decided their own skin is worth protecting and other people's will have to fend. Women gathered children, groceries, dignity. Coins lay scattered on the board, like teeth someone had dropped. "Are you hurt?" Rowan asked. No, she swallowed. You? He turned his head then, and she saw it. A seam of red at the edge. Of his hair, fine as if someone had drawn a line with a pen and then changed their mind. Graze, he said. Is that all? She hated how sharp it came out. It was fear, and fear always dressed itself in anger when it wanted to look respectable. For now, he said. He shifted. We move on 3, back of the table to the post. Ready? Yes. They moved. The market moved too, as if responding to a wind only they felt. The sheriff shouted something about order. A horse bolted and dragged a line of pots that made a horrible chiming. Somewhere a baby found the high note of terror. Tamsin reached for the ledger without thinking and tucked it into her satchel. She found that she could be terrified and keep accounts at the same time. Harlan's shout came like a bell. Got him! A scuffle thudded above them, then another. The crowd exhaled and held its breath again in the next inhalation. Bring him down, the sheriff yelled, because it sounded like authority and it cost nothing. 2 men appeared, hauling, a third between them. A stringy-armed kid with dirt in his ears, and the broken bravado of someone who had expected courage to arrive from nowhere and was surprised to learn it needed training. Harlan's knuckles were bleeding. He looked satisfied in a way that made Tamsin both grateful and worried for what satisfaction might ask of him next. Who paid you? Rowan asked the kid very quietly. If you lie, I will hear it. The boy's eyes flicked to Stroud and then, with a timidity that seemed half apology, to Baird. Arrest him, Hester said. And then arrest the men who hired him. I've got a pot of beans that needs stirring, and my patience is not going to do it for me. Careful, Stroud said again, but his voice had lost a layer of oil. You'll find yourself accused. Of what? Tamsin asked. Of standing up at my own table. She was shaking now, not with fear exactly, but with the sensation of a body that had decided to remain its own and was catching up to the cost of it. She steadied herself by putting her palm flat on the plank and remembering how wood feels when it remembers trees. The sheriff took the boy by the arm in the way of men who want to appear useful in front of a crowd. Harlan handed over a gun that looked like something a father might hide from a child and pretend he had thrown away. Rowan's eyes tracked the rooftops again, the alleys, the shadows that men could wear like coats. And then something in the day's balance tilted. A sound, like a breath being pulled very hard through teeth, a warning in her body that did not use words. Tamsin turned her head and saw, across the street, on the narrow sash of roof above Stroud's bank, the glint of a scope catching sun. Rowan, she whispered. It became, somehow, a shout and a prayer. Down! He moved, but the light moved. Faster. The crack was sharper than the others, and the world stuttered. Rowan jerked, a red flower blooming sudden and obscene at his side. His knees hit wood. He went down onto one hand, then onto both, as if the day had grown too heavy for any man to carry and chosen him to prove it. Tamsin's breath left her as if shot too. The crowd's sound turned into a single long thread of noise that pulled and never broke. Baird's mouth was open in a neat O of theatrical shock. Stroud had disappeared, like a card trick that had always been going to happen. Rowan. She was moving before she realized movement was possible. The people between them blurred into edges and elbows and fabric. Her knees hit the street hard enough that later she would find bruises that looked like the moon. Don't, he said, because men say that when they don't want you to pay the price, they just paid. His hand found her wrist. His fingers were warm and wet, and he didn't seem to know it. Stay. I'm here, she said. I'm here. She pressed her. Palm hard over the wound, felt heat and slick and the stubborn push of a life that was not yet ready to go. Look at me. I am, he said, and almost smiled. And then his eyes rolled, and his body went heavy, in that terrifying way bodies go when the person inside them steps back. Above them, on the bank roof, the second shooter reset his aim. Tamsin saw it as if she had been given a gift and told to use it wisely. The line from scope to man, the place the bullet would go next if she let the world continue unhindered. Around her, people were either running or freezing, all that human animals know how to do when the cliff erases the road. Tamsin did not run. She did not freeze. She reached into the crate and found the wooden-handled knife she had brought for cutting twine and string. It was small, ridiculous, useful for bread, not for bullets. She set her feet where they would hold. She raised her chin where Alma would have told her to keep it. She moved to stand over Rowan Lockridge, who had given her work and a bed and the gift of being treated like a person whose choices mattered, and set herself between him and the roof. She watched the scopes glint. The world narrowed to two, breaths, hers and his. The shooter's shadow shifted, her fingers tightened. She felt a calm she did not recognize, an old ocean she had not known she carried, rise to meet the horizon of what was about to happen. The trigger moved. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The trigger moved, the world narrowed to a bright needle, and the thread it meant to pull through Rowan Lockridge's heart. Tamsin's hand tightened on the ridiculous little knife. Then the part of her that counted saw something else. The way. The scope's glint wasn't a circle, but a sliver. The exact angle of light sliding off it like a coin off a tilted table. Her palm found the balm tin that had rolled against her thigh. She flipped it open on instinct, thumbed the lid flat, and lifted it into the sun. The tin caught the light and threw it like a slap. The shooter jerked. The bullet took her hat brim instead of her eye and howled into a stall of crockery that ended its life as a rain of shards. "Stay down," Rowan rasped. But he was beyond orders. His blood warmed her wrists. Across the street, Harlan Pike came up the back of the harness shop like a man who had argued with roofs before, and usually won. The shooter struggled with the flash, and Harlan was on him in the next breath. They went down together in a scrap of limbs and curses. A gun skittered, metal screaming against tar paper. Tamsin kept her tin raised a second longer, threw it aside, and drove both hands into Rowan's wound. Blood filled the ditch of her palms. It was frighteningly hot. "Doc!" she called, and heard her own voice find distance it hadn't known it had. "Doc, I'm here." Someone slid in on knees. Doc Green's hands took her hands, repositioned them with intimate authority. "Hold right there. Don't let up. Breathe." He said it to both of them. "I can't," Rowan began. "You can," Tamsin said. "So do." His mouth found half a smile. Bossy. Then his face went grey again. She wondered if he knew the way the word felt inside her chest, how it lit things up she had thought were meant to stay dark forever. The sheriff shouted the sort of orders men shout when they hope noise will choose a side. Hester Cottingham took a crate and turned it into a barricade around them with the brisk competence of a woman who had built things out of worse. The ribboned woman, Ruth Calder, as Tamsin would learn later, stood behind Hester with a rolling pin like a rod. People chose. You could watch them do it. Some ran, some returned, some discovered the shape of themselves and were surprised by it. Harlan, on the roof, got the shooter to his knees and cuffed him with rough twine stolen from a feed sack. The boy who had been dragged down earlier started crying. He looked 14. "Without the bravado, who else?" Harlan shouted. "Bank roof," Tamsin said, pointing with her chin. "Second shooter." The scope. The men's heads snapped toward the bank like dogs who suddenly remembered their names. A shadow detached from the roofline and vanished. One set of boots pounded across shingles, then down the far side to an alley that would keep its secrets. If nobody made it speak, Caleb Stroud was nowhere to be seen. Ezekiel Baird had found a milk crate to stand on, where he could look busy and absorb glances that weren't meant for him. Doc Green worked. He spoke in a low, running stream that made Tamsin think of creeks running under snow. In and out, Mr. Lockridge. Miss Holt, when I say you'll shift to the bandage. Not before. He had a way of making orders feel like gifts. Rowan watched her instead of his blood. He had very good eyes for a man losing focus. She watched him back and learned the map of the tiny muscles at the corners. She pressed harder. She thought of Alma's biscuits, how you cut the butter quick and don't talk to the dough until it's ready. She didn't talk to this blood either. She told her hands the truth. You will hold this life in. You will not let go because you are tired. Now, Doc Green said. She slid her palms away and the bandage took their place. Blood slicked her fingers. It made a little vow with the dirt under her nails. She didn't wipe them. She thought superstitionless. Things were for people who had never had their luck run out. Sheriff Greeley cleared his throat as if he had swallowed a stone. This market is closed pending investigation. You'll all go home. We will not, Hester said, and the women, with her, raised their chins. We will tend. We will testify. We will remember who ran and who hid. We will make supper on time. You can do your part and arrest someone. I've got one, Harlan called from the roof. He had dragged the rooftop shooter to the ladder. The man had the broken look of the taken. His friend lit out. The boy from earlier is Small Potatoes. Who paid? Rowan asked again and coughed. He hissed when that tugged the wound. Don't lie, he told the rooftop man, because truth sometimes works better when you say it like a reminder. The man looked at Stroud's door, and then at Baird's neat shoes, and then at Tamsin, who had blood up to her elbows, and no hat. He recalculated. Laska, he said. It arrived in the market like a weather change. Benton Laska. The name did what it always did when men said it. It made other men look smaller because they wanted to be looked at more. Arrest. Him? Ruth said, chin unrealistically high. I'd know where he eats on Sundays. We don't arrest names, Sheriff Greeley hedged. We arrest men and proof. Start with the one you've got, Harlan suggested. Other proof will follow. They took Rowan to Doc Green's, two-room surgery that had learned to pretend it was a hospital. Tamsin walked beside the stretcher because her feet were wise enough to know they wouldn't go anywhere else. Harlan walked on the other side, shoulders squared against things that could no longer be unfought. The dog with eyebrows paced them and whined once, as if asking if he was meant to be brave or wise. Rowan came and went from the shore. When he was on it, he was very present. Don't let Alma burn the beans, he murmured, and Tamsin could have laughed if laughing didn't feel like a crime. Tell Harlan that gate's going to keep trying to be a door unless he shows it some religion. Tell Ruth Calder that the sweet biscuits are making my men soft. You tell them, Tamsin said, because it was either that or sobbing, and she had never trusted sobbing to do anything but salt what didn't need it. Doc Green's wife, Edie, had arms like sanctuary. She met them at the door and made the world smaller. They got Rowan on the table and stripped the shirt he'd already bled through. Tamsin stepped back until the back of her knees met a chair. She sank. Her hands shook. She looked down and saw that the little thin coin Alma had tucked into her packet had stuck to the blood on her wrist. It looked like it had been minted to purchase this exact moment. You faint, you'll be in my way, Edie said kindly, and shoved a cup of sugared tea into Tamsin's hand. I don't faint, Tamsin said. I break and stand. She swallowed half the tea and hated it, and finished it anyway. Doc Green set a bottle of carbolic on the side table, the way a man sets down the thing he's going to war with. Bullet went through, he muttered, peering into Rowan's side. Bad path, but a path. You're a lucky man, Mr. Lockridge. Luck, Rowan said, and if his voice broke on it, no one made a note in any ledger. I started the day with some and found a more expensive kind. His eyes flicked toward Tamsin and lodged there. Hold him, Doc said, and Harlan's hands were there, and Edie's and Tamsin's without her remembering telling them to be. When Rowan's back arched and he tried to climb out of his own pain, Tamsin leaned close, so he had somewhere good to climb toward. "Here," she said softly. "Here." He came back to here, to her, because men will sometimes, if you give them a reason. By late afternoon he was asleep. Not the false sleep of men knocked down, but the ugly, necessary kind that stitches in rough thread. Doc Green looked older by 2 years and younger by 10 when relief loosened him. "He'll live," he said, "if water lives, if luck doesn't go spend itself on something foolish." "Water," Harlan said, eyes returning to the same problem because he had learned not to let a victory swagger. "The sluice fire was set. They didn't get far because we saw the smoke, but they'll try again when the wind is uglier." "Lascar," Tamsin said. The name tasted like rust. "He thinks water is a way to make men bend." "He knows it," Harlan said. "So does the bank. Stroud is in for a piece of whatever sells when the men who can't draw from the creek sell what the creek doesn't serve." "Ezekiel Baird sold me a train ticket," Tamsin said, and the flint in her voice cut through the air. "Stroud sold men like him interest on a person's drowning." Harlan glanced at her hands. "You're shaking." She looked. She was. "I will stop." She opened and closed them until they believed her. Edie pushed a chair at Tamsin with her foot. "Sit. Watch him. If he jerks, call. If he calls, answer. You, Harlan, go get Alma. She'll want to throw her spoon at God for not giving her two, of herself, and then she'll bring broth." "And you?" Harlan asked. "I'm going to send a boy for my husband's brother," Edie said. "His brother is a circuit judge who pretends not to be fond of his mother's sister's boy. He is fond. He will at least read a letter about a banker and a mercantile man, and a man who thinks a river is property." "You can do that?" Tamsin asked. "Hope is a dangerous thing. It will pop up like weeds and try to make a meadow out of a ditch." "I can write," Edie said. "Whether the world reads is its own kind of weather." Tamsin sat. Hours narrowed to pulses and the way light moves across a wall. She thought of biscuits and of the way butter needs cold to behave. She pressed that lesson against her heat. When Rowan woke, she was there. When he slept, she was there. It turned out to be a simple thing, being there, and a heroism she could afford. Evening went purple. Alma arrived with broth that tasted like an answer to a question you hadn't known how to ask. She put it on the stove, and then put her hands on Tamsin's shoulders and squeezed until her bones remembered where to line up. "You were braver than your good sense," Alma said. "Try to be both next time." "I didn't think," Tamsin admitted. It felt like confessing to stealing Sundays. "You thought," Alma corrected. "You thought faster than the man who thought he could spend your life and buy the change with your regret." Rowan stirred. His eyes opened a slit. "Alma?" "Here," Alma said, and softened in ways she would later deny. "Drink, then sleep, or I'll tell every woman in town that you cried when you were born and couldn't stop for 4 years." Rowan made an obedient noise. Alma fed him, and then stared over the rim of the bowl at Tamsin, like a general who has decided to promote a private without letting her know she's been drafted. "You keep him flat and quiet," Alma said. "The men will make noise at the gate at dawn. Harlan will want to go with them. You cannot let him if he does not leave you help. Lascar's men move faster when they think the boss is bleeding." "Then I go," Tamsin said. Alma snorted. "You go if Harlan goes with you. You go if you remember that wanting to save a man is not the same as being able to. You do not go because of pride. Pride won't keep you warm when the river takes its due." "The river," Tamsin said, and met Alma's eyes. "I won't let anyone put a hand on its throat." "You'll try," Alma said, which is how women bless each other when they're pretending they're not. "I'll sit second watch. Wake me if he starts to be stupid." Dawn threw a red coin on the table of the sky and waited to see who was going to pick it up. Harlan came in with dust already on him, which meant he had been out in the grey hour when the world is deciding which way to roll. "Men downriver moving rocks that don't belong to them," he said. "Lasker's building a temporary gate across the old flood channel. It'll trick the creek into believing his land is downhill." "That'll starve our sluice," Alma said, anger solid to plain sense, "and flood us when the storm comes." "Sheriff," Tamsin asked, "has a cousin who's married to a sister who serves on Lasker's kitchen," Harlan said. "He wants to see all sides. I told him there's only one side when a man puts a hand on your throat, and that side is no." Tamsin stood and looked at Rowan. He was asleep again, spent and mended a fraction. She wanted, with a suddenness that made her knees go loose, to stay, to watch his chest rise and fall, and to be the thing that meant he did the second part of. That she didn't. The ranch was a live thing, the creek was a lung. She didn't confund her private wanting with the larger breath. "Harlan," she said, "you don't need me to swing a pick, but you need someone who can count what you need and who's there and what's missing. You need someone who will hear the sound water makes when it's being lied to." He gave her a very brief nod, with a weight in it that made it feel like a medal. "Alma, you mind the doc and the fool. Miss Holt with me." "Take biscuits," Alma said. "Men will argue better on a full regret." They rode. The sorrel mare had learned Tamsin's hands overnight and forgave the jolts she didn't intend. They took the low trace road to the creek. Even before they saw men, they could hear the sound of rocks learning new addresses. Lasker's men had made a work gang out of fear and wages. They hauled and levered and swore in the ways men swear when their boss likes to be impressed. Benton. Lasker himself was not there. His hat was in the way of men whose privilege can make a hat do the same amount of harm as a body. "Morning," Harlan said, as if he had come to borrow salt. "This is illegal." The foreman Lasker had sent was a flop of a man who had made himself into a triangle to feel like a point. He looked down his nose and found that the ground still outranked him. "We've got permission," he said. "From who?" Harlan asked. "From water," the foreman said. "It runs where a man tells it if the man is the kind whose mama told. Him he could." Tamsin stepped down before Harlan could remove his patience. She took in the whole ugliness of it, the piling of stones at the mouth of the flood channel, the way the men had jammed timbers at an angle to make the creek taste, their shape and follow it, the sacks of sand where a beaver once had an opinion. She saw also the heel print of a mismatched spur in the damp bar at the margin. "You paid a boy to shoot a man yesterday," she said to the foreman, "and you paid a man who didn't finish. You'll pay for that twice." "Who is she?" the foreman asked Harlan, but kept his eyes on Tamsin, which is a way of asking and also a way of not. "Miss Holt," Harlan said. "She reads ledgers and men. She'll make more trouble than you planned for before dinner." The foreman laughed, the way a mule laughs when it kicks. "What you gonna do? Count me back to town?" Tamsin took a step, then another, until her boots were where the river put its lips when it wanted to taste the shore. She pointed at the rocks they'd stacked. "I'm going to move numbers, yours. When you pile that, the river's going to back up where you didn't plan. Your own boss's lower field is going to drown his seed. Your men will remember the smell of rot in their sleep. The only thing you'll grow is mosquitoes and regret." "You ain't a water witch," Scarchin sneered. He was there, his mismatched spur printed its confession on the wet places wherever he went. "You're a woman who thinks saying a thing makes it true." "Sometimes it does," she said. "Sometimes a town hears its name out loud and remembers how to stand up straight. Sometimes a man hears the truth out of a woman's mouth and hears his mother and is saved." She pointed past the foreman's shoulder. "Sometimes a sheriff remembers he knows the law." Sheriff Greeley had come, sweating embarrassment and something that might one day be righteous. He looked at the piled rocks and found the part of himself that had been taught to read. "That's a block. You can't block." "We're redirecting," the foreman said. "You're stealing," Harlan said. "Say the right words for the thing." Greeley shifted in his boots. "I don't—" "Sheriff," Tamsin said, You have the power right now to decide whether this town is run by men who believe water is a gift or men who believe it is a leash." She was surprised at how quiet her voice came out, as if she had found a place where shouting would be redundant. He looked between her and Harlan and the foreman and the creek. He saw the mismatched spur print because she tipped her chin toward it, and hope can grab a man by the face and make him look where he ought. "Take it down," he said finally. "All of it. If Lasker has a paper, he can bring it to my desk with." The ink still wet, the foreman swore. Scarchin made a noise like a knife being taken off a table. Men grumbled the way men do when a day's wages just became a day's argument. "You heard him," Harlan said, and swung down because sometimes you back the law by being one. It took hours, and every hour grew a new enemy. Water likes to be left alone, but it will forgive you if you learn its preference while you work. By noon the pile was a line, and the line was nothing, and the creek had gone back to believing gravity again. Tamsin's knees were wet, and her braid held enough silt to plant tomatoes in. When she looked up, Benton Lasker was riding down the bank like a man who expected rocks to move out of courtesy. He was not tall, which is information. He wore his clothes like a verdict, which is another. His eyes were the color of coins in a jar no one sees the bottom of. When he smiled, men felt they'd been thanked and didn't realize they'd been itemized. "Mr. Pike," he said, "always. A joy to discover how early in the day your stubbornness wakes, about as early as your arrogance," Harlan said. "And you," Lasker said, turning to Tamsin. He let his gaze move her like he was predicting her height. "I've heard you. Found a tongue in the market. You going to wag it on my land?" "I'm going to count on your land," Tamsin said evenly. "Somebody should." He laughed then, a pleasant, lazy sound that could curdle milk if you left it out of the shade. "You think numbers make you safe? Numbers make prisons and fortunes and churches, Miss Holt. Miss Holt, the funny thing about numbers is they tell any story a man wants if he feeds them right." "Like men," Tamsin said, "if they're hungry enough." Something in his eyes cooled. "You're Lockridge's charity. Don't mistake being under a man's roof for being in his ledger." "I bring my own ledger," she said. He let the smile die. "Sheriff," he said, louder now, "you interfering with a man's right to improve his property." "I'm enforcing a water share adjudication we agreed to," Greeley said quickly. "On paper you signed, Mr. Lasker, in front of the judge who married your oldest girl." "Paper," Lasker said mildly, "is very brave until it meets fire." He turned his horse. "Men," he added without raising his voice. His men were good at hearing that tone. "We'll revisit. More lawyers, fewer rocks." He tipped his hat to Tamsin. It wasn't a compliment. "Pleasure." "You'll keep taking his stones down," Greeley said under his breath to Harlan. When Lasker was out of earshot, "He'll keep putting them up. I'll keep signing." He looked like a man who had expected to die quiet and had just been assigned a different adjective. "Or," Tamsin said, "we can make him stop wanting to." "How?" Harlan asked. "We take away his story," she said. "The one he tells. The town about who he is. We write a better one, with proof and numbers and witnesses who finally hate the smell of his lies in their house enough to let it out." Harlan pushed his hat back. "You always talk like that?" "Only when I'm angry," she said, "or making biscuits." He snorted, which for Harlan was affection. "Then we'll get you another sack of flour." When they rode back, the town had changed shape. Sheriff Greeley had locked the rooftop shooter in a cell and was trying to remember how to look like a man who believed in locks. Caleb Stroud's bank had somehow grown more shade. Ezekiel Baird held court on his stoop, lamenting the state of the world to anyone who would lend his ear long enough to borrow it. Hester caught Tamsin's sleeve. "I sold 24 bars for you while you were off telling men what their hands were supposed to be doing," she said. "Here's your coin, hide it." "Where?" Tamsin asked. "On your person," Hester said. "God had the right idea making women with so many seams." Her eyes softened. "How is he?" "Sleeping," Tamsin said. "He'll live if cane sugar and stubbornness are medicine." "That man's stubbornness could cure a plague," Hester said. "Go sit him a story," but she couldn't. Not yet. The foreman, with the triangle shape, and the scar-chin spur man were drinking near the livery, and their laughter had the sound of men who believed they would get to pick the ending. Tamsin walked past them without pausing. She went straight into Stroud's Bank. The air in there smelled like ink that had married and had children. "Miss Holt," Stroud said, rising from his chair like good manners had just stepped into him. "What an unexpected pleasure." She did not sit. "I want a copy of the remittance receipt for the pass-through funds sent to Baird and Sons Dry Goods from the agency." She set her hands on his tidy desk. "And the record of their return. Wire, and a statement listing holding times for similar funds in the past 6 months, with names omitted, so we can discuss them without you accusing me of gossip." He blinked. "We don't. You do," she said. "Because it is the law, and because you want to look like you obey it when people are looking." She told him the numbers she wanted. She gave him dates. She watched him recalculate the size of her, and it felt like a dress she hadn't known would fit. "I'll have my clerk assemble," he began. "You'll have me watch you as you pull the books," she said, "because we both know about stapled pages and forgotten ledgers. Harlan Pike will stand outside with a hand on the door so the sunlight doesn't accidentally knock the truth over on its way out." He studied her. It could have been offense. It could have been admiration. He was the sort of man who could dress one as the other. "Miss Holt," he said finally, "are you declaring war?" "I'm declaring accounting," she said. "Wars are expensive. I prefer to pay as I go." He almost smiled. "Very well." He went into the back and came out with a ledger the size of an awkward child. His hands were steady. He laid it open. He turned the past into pages. Tamsin read, "Numbers tell you their habits if you feed them patience." She found holding periods whose length matched no policy but the breath of a man's greed. She found fees written in with a pen bought just for that kind of word. She found the thing she needed. Evidence that funds meant for women like her had been used to shore up a loan to Benton Lasker's mill for 11 days that had grown to 21. "Why?" she asked softly. "You had money." He didn't pretend. "Because his money makes me more," he said. "Because men who have enough to spread around put their hands in their friends' pantries and call it borrowing sugar. And women who have nothing," she said, "get instructed in gratitude while they pay interest on soda biscuits." She closed the book. "I'll want a copy of these pages." "Of course," he said politely, "if you can pay for the clerk's time." "I can," she said, "because I work." Rowan woke toward evening and asked, as if no time had passed since noon, about the gate that wanted to be a door. She told him what they had done at the creek. He tried to sit. His body refused. She put her hand on his shoulder and felt the muscle there decide to stay. "You can't keep this up," he said quietly. "You can't keep choosing a town with your hands and making it be better." "I can try," she said. "Trying is cheaper than regret." His eyes softened in a way that made her aware of her ribcage. "You have a way of saying things that makes me imagine they've always been true." "Maybe they have," she said. "Maybe we were just working too loud to hear them." A rap at the door. Harlan came in without waiting, which meant it was important. "They're doing it now," he said. "Night. No witnesses except the moon." "Doing what?" Tamsin asked, though she already knew. "Setting charges at the headgate," he said. "Lasker hired a man knows powder more than he knows his own children. They're going to blow the sluice and say the river did it." "I'll go," Rowan said, and tried to sit again. His face went white and beautiful with refusal and pain. "No," Tamsin said. The word came out like a board nailed across a door. "You'll die, and then the ranch will have to hold the men who loved it without the man who taught it how. We go." She looked at Harlan. "You and me." You're not wrong, Harlan said. But I don't like the parts you didn't. Say, we take Alma's salt, she said, and a bucket and the thing men like this don't expect. What's that? Witnesses. They went on foot. Horses make noise, and Laska's men had ears tuned to catch it and turn it into pride. Harlan led. Tamsin followed. The dog with the eyebrows went with them to a certain point, and then lay down and decided to wait right there until the whole world remembered where it had put its good sense. The night was a soft wait. The creek talked louder in darkness. They slipped through cottonwoods and along the edge of alfalfa that needed water before it could remember how to be itself. The headgate rose ahead like a black ribcage on the horizon. Shadows moved at its base. Men's voices were low and felt tall. Tamsin crouched behind a fallen log and watched with the attention of a woman sewing her own hem by candle. Harlan counted shapes under his breath. 4, maybe 5. His hand touched the knife at his belt. Powderman'll be the one talking least. Tamsin saw him. A compact figure with careful shoulders, the way of a man who trusted his hands and not his friends. She saw, too, mismatched spurs and a foreman in a different hat. She took Alma's packet of salt from her pocket and closed her palm on it. It felt like a hinge in her hand, something you could make a door from if you got the angle right. What's the plan? Harlan asked. Throw water where fire means to be, she said, and move a number. She eased left, using the shape of the land as if it had been drawn for her. She found the small tin pails the men had set out for themselves, carelessly. After all, who would creep in and steal a sip from a thief's cups? She left them alone. She took the bucket she had carried and eased along the ditch until she found the place where the current gave her more than she asked. She filled the bucket and brought it back without the water telling on her. On my mark, Harlan whispered, his jaw set. He intended to be the sort of man the stories talk about when men want to be braver than they are. No, she breathed. On mine. She waited for the powder man to lean in and set his first fuse. She waited for him to lick his finger and pinch the wick like a lover of fire who likes to be kissed back. When his head was bent and Scarchin smiled at nothing good, she rose and walked out of the dark like a woman entering her own kitchen. She threw the water. The powder man's curse was strangled and personal. He whirled with a short, efficient rage that said he had used it as a tool often. Harlan was on him in the next step, knife at his throat, not to kill, but to remind. Scarchin went for his gun. Tamsin threw the salt into his eyes. He reeled, howling, and fired at the sound of his own pain. Bullets learned air and then forgot it. No, the foreman said. It was part warning, part prayer, part admission that tonight had learned not to be his. He drew, and then learned regret. Harlan moved like a door swinging true. The foreman's gun went clattering into weeds. A fifth man rose from shadow. He had the evenness of the sort men pay extra for. Tamsin recognized his stillness from the rooftop, from the scope, from the part of herself that kept a ledger of danger. He was the one who had put the flower of blood in Rowan's side. She knew it with the accuracy of a number that had been checked and checked again because you knew it mattered. He took careful aim at Harlan's back. He exhaled. His trigger started its slow pull through the world. Here, Tamsin shouted and ran, because people will sometimes turn a bullet with nothing but a voice and a body that insists on being where it isn't invited. The even man chose. He swept, recalibrated, decided she was a more elegant shot because a cruelty likes to be appreciated. The muzzle flashed, the sound stabbed the dark. Tamsin's shoulder burned and she stumbled, then held. Pain made a cold hand on a hot stone of her. She didn't fall. She heard Harlan's knife meet flesh. She smelled powder that had lost its temper. The even man went down with a sigh of disgust that suggested death had bored him. Damn it, Harlan hissed, because he preferred not to bleed without at least a complaint. You hit? Through, she said. She had counted it. Or near. Enough. Help me stand anyway. They stood in a crude circle of groans and fear and salt. The foreman panted, scar chin folded like a broken tripod. The powder man sagged against his own skill. Tamsin bound her arm with her skirt hem and her teeth. She found her breath. She counted it. She found the fuses where they had been laid, like a handwriting. She found the box where the rest of the powder slumbered. She took the fuses in her left hand and broke them the way you break a man's story, short, at the joint, where it expects to bend. "Sheriff," Harlan said, "if he doesn't come to me and ask me to arrest him, I'm going to get him with a rope and a sense of civics." "He'll come," Tamsin said. "He likes being seen when he pretends to be useful." They waited. Harlan tied men with knots made for cattle that didn't want to learn their pen. The night grew teeth. Tamsin shivered and didn't pretend. She hadn't. When Sheriff Greeley arrived, he looked at the even man's body and the fuses in her fist and the way the headgate rose unblown against the dark. The ledger in his face flipped its own page. "You can put me in the same cell as the boy," the powder man said suddenly. His voice was tired for a man his age. "If there's mercy, give it to him. I took a price and paid one. That kid took a dare with hunger in it." Tamsin swallowed. "Pity is a door, and you can walk through it into stupidity if you go unshod. You'll write it," she said, "and sign it, and we'll unstack whatever Lasker stacked in that pretty, careful head of yours, word by word." Greeley rubbed his face. He had a day's stubble and a decade's regret on his jaw. "Even if I take them in," he said, "Lasker's lawyers will split seconds into hours and tie them to rocks until we forget what we were angry about." Bills were mentioned, fees, the price of favor in a town where water could make you rich or poor, depending on which side of it you were left standing. Men shifted, women did not. The room made itself heavy and useful. "You will repay the held remittances by Thursday," Riggs said. "You will add the interest you would have demanded of any of them." He pointed to the women as if to remind Baird that women are a plurality even when men prefer their grammar singular. "You will do it in this room." Baird's mouth opened and closed. A men's choir could have used him as a metronome. "And if we do not?" he asked finally. Riggs's jaw found a shape it had liked when he was younger. "Then I will preach a sermon where I read the names of men who believe their God approves of theft every Sunday until the season changes." Caleb Stroud made a calculation in 2 seconds that had taken him 20 years to be ready to do. "Thursday," he said lightly. "Of course." Baird nodded, because he liked to be seen agreeing with things, even things he was sure he would undo later where he was comfortable. The congregation exhaled. It made the curtains move. Outside, the creek ran its small song against stones that had learned the tune the right way again. They didn't make it to Thursday. Monday night, under a moon that made silver knives out of every edge, Harlan woke to the dog, with eyebrows pawing the door. He opened it and had a feeling move through him like a horseman moving through high grass, sudden and necessary. He threw on his jacket and was already moving when he yelled Tamsin's name. She was in the kitchen counting coins because it helped her sleep. Harlan's face told her what she needed to know. "Where?" she asked. "Upstream," he said. "I can smell powder. The dog can smell men who think the night is a partner." "Rowan," she began. But Rowan was already in the doorway, colorless and ferocious and out of bed for the first time since the street tried to learn what he was full of. "You are not coming," Harlan said. "You will drop, and then I will have to choose between you and the gate." Rowan looked as if the choice would have cut him. He stepped back like a man learning humility in 5 seconds. "Go," he said. It cost him to say it. He paid Alma. Threw a rope over Tamsin's shoulder and put a kiss on her cheek that felt like being adopted by a hurricane. "Don't die," she said simply. "I'm old enough to be tired of funerals." They ran. The dog ran ahead, joyous in the way dogs are when a danger finally lets them be the thing they believe they are. The poplars turned their leaves over and showed their pale bellies as if to wish them luck. They came over the last rise and saw them. 6 this time, and one of them bent over a coil of fuse like a man proposing. The headgate was black against the light. The air smelled like the kind of fight that doesn't respect prayer. Harlan's hand found her arm. "On 3, he said. 1. But the fuse took the count from him. Scarchin's friend, the even man's replacement, had learned from the last time. He'd set fuses in 3 places and lit them together, one at the base, one hidden in weeds, one nearly beneath the slatted walkway. 2, Harlan said, because you don't stop counting just because you no longer own the numbers. 3, Tamsin breathed and ran to the walkway. The middle fuse hissed and burned like a letter being read in the wrong room. She threw herself onto the slats, knife out, fingers scrabbling. The night air made water on her lip. The fuse sizzled and skittered and tried to run away from her cut. She caught it. She pinched it. It bit. It died. "Second!" Harlan shouted. She crawled, blood in one sleeve and water on her knees. The fuse in the weeds had been laid like a habit. She broke that one too, suddenly grateful for all the hems she had ripped in rooms where no one thanked her. "Third!" Harlan's voice broke. He wasn't looking at the base. He was looking at the thing they had hidden. A powder sack, tucked. Up under the walkway's belly, fuse snugged against it like a secret. It was already short and angry. Tamsin lunged. Her knife flashed. The dog's bark turned into a howl of warning that made her ears ring. A shadow rose at the end of the walkway, a man's silhouette cut out of mean. He brought a rifle to his shoulder and aimed at Harlan's chest. Tamsin didn't think. She didn't intend to be brave. She was. She threw herself between gun and man again, as if the lesson had to be repeated to be learned. The rifle's muzzle flared. The plank near her hand exploded into splinters. She flinched, and her knife skittered. The fuse spit and licked and went bright. She grabbed. Pain bit her palm hard. She crushed the ember between 2 fingers that had been made for sewing and got a lifetime's worth of disbelief in what a body could do when it refused to be told. No. The man at the end of the walkway cursed and fired again. The dog launched, a brown comet with eyebrows, and took the man at the knees. Harlan's knife met the man's gun arm. Bone made a noise like a chair thrown over a floorboard. For a half-breath the night went quiet, a held breath in a held breath. Then someone else's shot split it from the far bank, from the blacker side of the black. The bullet hit the powder sack Tamsin had just saved from the fuse. Fire is a fast learner. It doesn't need fuses if you give it a lesson it can love. It took the sack like a kiss. It ran back into the little powder that had sifted out while men made careless hands. It ran along a splintered plank and found the refuse of earlier mistakes and made them today's facts. "Tamsin!" Harlan shouted. Because that is what men shout when they are too late and need a name to wrap the world in. He lunged for her. The walkway shuddered. The headgate groaned, the way trees groan when lightning is deciding whether it wants to remember them. The world filled with light. The headgate cracked like a sternum. The river rose in its bed and found its other self. The blast threw Tamsin backward, and then downward, and then nowhere at all. For a second he caught her wrist. For a second she had the sensation of being entirely held and entirely untethered at once. For a second the dog's teeth flashed like promises. Then the board split and the river took her name and said it out loud. She fell into a roar. Wood and light and water and all the numbers she had ever counted became one. She had one breath and liked it, and then the water took it back as collateral. The current grabbed her and shoved her through itself as if it were a room full of men who had already decided what you were and now wanted to prove it. The world became a hand and a hammer, and then just a long, bright noise. Hands grabbed at her. One, then another, then none. She hit something, and the something hit back. She opened her mouth to ask for a better ending and found only river. The sky tumbled and caught and fell again. The last thing she saw was Harlan's face, wolf-grey and brutal with trying, and behind him on the bank, a figure running with a stagger that was too familiar. Rowan, shirt open, bandage bloody, running like a promise, running like a man who had decided to die if that was the cost of reaching her. He shouted her name. The river took her under. Under? The river said it like a sentence, and then like a song. Under, as in beneath the place where breath bargains. Under, as in the middle syllable between yesterday and the part of tomorrow you can't afford yet. It closed over Tamsin Holt. With a sound like a door shutting in a storm, she did not think of dying. She thought of the ledger she had not balanced, the column still waiting for a sum, Rowan's palm exactly the temperature of a promise, and Alma's biscuits cooling on a towel. The mind saves what it can. She tucked those things into her chest, like kindling, and pushed, not with arms, not at first, but with refusal. Refusal, it turns out, floats. The current swung her sideways hard. Something wooden rammed her ribs and then apologized with splinters. She pinwheeled and found what felt like sky with the back of her hand. Her fingers broke the surface just long enough to snatch a breath shaped like a theft. She went under again. Not like this, she told the water, and it laughed because water laughs at every kind of certainty. She kicked and counted. 1 for Harlan's barked order, 2 for the dog's eyebrows, and their stern insistence on justice, 3 for Rowan's shout when he said her name. 4 was for herself, and 5 was for the part of her that had once been told she was too poor to buy a life, and had believed it right up until it wasn't true anymore. Hands brushed her shoulder and were gone. A rope struck her cheek like an insult. She grabbed and missed. The river seized her by the waist like a rough dance partner who hadn't learned the count. She spun, hit a snag, and clung. Branches clawed at her dress, at her hair, at the choices that had brought her to this exact dark. She clawed back. The snag held, the snag argued. She argued harder. That was what she had learned to do out here, argue with a flood, until it remembered it was just water and she was allowed to be a person. A voice cut through the roar, Harlan's, flat, urgent. Then another, ragged and wrong and beloved. Rowan, when pain was something he could wear while he ran. "Hold! I am!" she said, and swallowed river. The snag let go, or she did. Impossible to know which. The world turned bright, and then black, and then bright again like a lantern thrown about by an angry hand. She went under a last time, with her mouth open and her eyes open, and her hands open too, as if to suggest she would settle for any miracle that came in size small. Miracles come like work. Something slammed into her, and this time it was a body, not a board. Arms wrapped through hers with a competence that borrowed from desperation. A chest heaved against her back. A voice, Rowan's voice, made a sound that wasn't a word but understood the grammar of "don't you dare." They rolled together, rolled. His legs were a kick and a prayer. She felt him grimace every time he pulled with his wounded side. She felt his blood find the river and test its flavor. It made her furious, which made her stronger. She kicked with him. They hit another snag. And this one took them like an old aunt who hugs too hard because she has opinions about survival. Harlan's rope came again, and this time it stuck. Harlan dragged, cursing, with the very particular piety of men who don't want to see their world empty itself. The dog got teeth on Rowan's collar and hauled like a saint. They came out on their knees. The headgate's shattered skeleton loomed. Smoke fanned across the creek like pride that didn't yet know it had lost. Tamsin coughed river until her ribs threatened to leave, then sucked in air that felt like a lie she decided to forgive. "You," Harlan said, pointing at Rowan with a finger that shook from rage more than exertion. "What part of you will drop and I will have to choose look like an invitation?" "None," Rowan panted, dragging hair out of his eyes with a hand that was starting to tremble on its own. "The part where I heard her name decided to misunderstand me." He looked at Tamsin then, and everything else, the smoke, the cracked timbers, the men groaning further down the bank, unmattered for a breath. "You all right?" She took inventory. Arms, legs, pain in 3 tidy places, and 6 untidy ones, a patch of skin on her palm, singing the alphabet of burn. "I will be when the county remembers how to spell injunction," she said. It came out thin, but intact. Rowan laughed exactly once, and then hissed. His bandage had gone dark again. "Doc," Harlan said, already standing. "Edie, Alma, Sheriff, everyone. I need everyone who ever said they cared about anything to bring. Buckets and scents." He blew 2 short whistles on his fingers. The whistles had been a boyhood trick once. Tonight they belonged to the emergency. People came. That is one thing towns can be relied upon to do when a woman and a rancher and a river call them. Sheriff Greeley came white-faced and running. Doc Green came with a bag and a look that suggested he had borrowed an extra temper for the night. Edie came with bandages. Alma came with a length of rope across one shoulder and something in her pocket that looked like a prayer and wasn't polite. "Alive?" Doc demanded, already on his knees in the mud. "Hurt," Harlan said, "but unwilling to admit it." "Good," Edie said. "Admitting it would make my job harder." She got Tamsin's palm in her hands. "Burn," she decided. "And a righteous one. You ruined the pretty Miss Holt?" "I was never that pretty," Tamsin said. "It'll be an improvement." Edie snorted affection. "Hold still, bite this." She handed Tamsin a strap and wrapped the burn with something that stung like it had been born in vinegar. Tamsin breathed out a long row of numbers and found her way to the end. Doc Green dragged Rowan's ruined bandage clear and pressed 2 fingers above the worst of it until the bleeding receded and the world thought about calming down. "You," he said to Rowan, "are a fool of the finest water." "Later," Rowan muttered, eyes on the headgate that wheezed and shuddered like an old man trying to remember a song. The creek, Tamsin said, pulling herself upright. Her hair left mud on her cheeks like war paint. "We have to move the jams before the water teaches us what happens when you interrupt a sentence with dynamite." Men heard, and that and moved. Women sent them where they would be useful, which is the holier version of the same. Harlan took one bank with 6 and a pry bar. Tamsin took the other with a hook she found in the reeds, and 3 boys who had previously believed mischief was a vocation. The dog ran messages because he did not believe in leaving himself out of a story with so many verbs. They worked through the dark. The river resisted, then learned, then sighed and relented. By dawn, a pulsing steadiness had replaced the wild hammering in the current. The headgate looked like a soldier who had stood in the wrong place at the right time and lived. The ranch would flood in the lower fields if the weather spat, but the lungs of it, the ditches and the long silver sleeve of the main flow, would breathe. Tamsin's hands shook when she finally stopped. Alma wrapped them in clean cloth and laid them in Tamsin's lap like babies. "Now you cry," Alma suggested. "Later," Tamsin said hoarsely, because she had learned the world respected a woman who scheduled her grief. "We still have to count." "Count what?" Harlan asked, walking up with a limp and the expression of a man who was going to sleep for 3 days someday in the future when sleeping was legal again. "Witnesses," Tamsin said. "Shell fragments, the piece of fuse I put in my pocket, the paper we make men read out loud." She looked to Rowan. He was watching her with eyes full of the kind of light that made a person want to say brave things and then stand there and be responsible for them. "And the ways they'll try next. They're coming," Sheriff Greeley said grimly. "Lasker's riders, they want to put a flag in the mud and declare it theirs, because that's how he does law when the paper says no." "Good," Tamsin said. "Let them see us awake." They gathered in the wide apron of the headgate's yard, the place where the town held its harvest socials when nobody was trying to make the river into a subservient creature. Lasker rode in with 2 men on either side and one behind, carrying a folded paper like a banner. He was exquisitely groomed. Even his anger had good cuffs. Caleb Stroud came in a carriage that squeaked a little more than pride should have permitted. Ezekiel Baird walked, which was his way of suggesting humility while ensuring he could later claim he hadn't known where the wagon was going. "You blew up my gate," Lasker said conversationally. "You hired men to blow up ours," Harlan replied, equally cordial. Lasker's gaze skipped the men and settled on Tamsin's wrapped hands. His mouth found an inexpensive smile. "I hear you have a talent for being in the wrong place and surviving it." "I do," she said. "So do rattlesnakes." She nodded to the man behind him holding the paper. "Is that a letter or a towel for the sweat you're about to incur?" "It's an injunction," Lasker said. "Signed last night ex parte by a judge who knows what enterprise looks like." Doc Green slipped a folded letter out of his own breast pocket and handed it to Edie, who put it in Tamsin's good hand. "This judge," Tamsin read as Lasker paused for theatre, "will be of interest when he arrives." She held the letter up so the crowd could see the seal. "Circuit Judge Whitfield Green, sitting special until the spring circuit resumes, has accepted a petition to enjoin any alteration of the headgate and to consider evidence of criminal tampering by parties unnamed." She let her eyes meet Lasker's. "He also is on his way. Edie sent for him." "The judge," Lasker said carefully, "is a family friend." "Lucky you," Edie said, tone like a laundry paddle. "He hates being embarrassed in front of family." Caleb Stroud adjusted his cuffs to remind the son that it owed him respect. "Miss Holt," he purred, "you are beginning to look like a person unfamiliar with who runs things." "I'm intimately familiar with how things have been run," Tamsin said. "We're changing it." "On what authority?" Baird asked, and then blinked as if worried he'd said it in the wrong key. "On the authority of women who kept your houses standing while you were lying about who you were," Hester called from the crowd. Her voice carried. So did Ruth's. "On the authority of water that refuses to learn your last name." Lasker surveyed the faces. Some he owned, some he rented, some he had planned to buy. Too many looked not for sale in the morning light. "Sheriff," he said, "arrest somebody." Greeley folded his arms. "I will. After the judge hears the confession I took last night from your powder man, after he sees the fuses, after the boy you sent to the market says the name he was told to say." Lasker's eyes flicked. The boy was there, thin as a willow switch, and sick with the kind of fear that felt permanent. Alma stepped closer to him, not touching in case he needed to pretend he wasn't about to lean. "Judge will decide," Harlan said, "because that's the story we're choosing to live this time. Until then," Tamsin added, "you will neither touch a stone nor whisper to a creek. You will ride home and sit on your porch and contemplate a new way to be a man," Lasker's smile inched. Or we will read your ledger out loud at the church every Sunday," Pastor Riggs said from somewhere behind them, "and the God you claim will get tired of hearing your name." Stroud chuckled, but it sounded like a man trying to make a coin look bigger than it is. "The ladies do love theatre," he murmured. "They love receipts," Tamsin said, letting her gaze fall deliberately to his jacket pocket, where the clerk's careful copies had found the inside lining. "You will bring the remittance money. Tonight instead of Thursday." "Impossible," Stroud said smoothly. "Possible," Sheriff Greeley said, "or we seal your doors until the judge decides whose money you run." Baird swallowed a syllable. "Caleb," he said, not quite as quietly as he meant. "Do as they say." Lasker cut him a glance that could have cut rope. Another calculation swung in his eyes and landed somewhere he liked less than yesterday. "Very well," he said tightly. "Tonight." He turned his horse. "Enjoy your borrowed courage," he added to Tamsin without looking back. "It tends to come due." "It already did," she said. "We paid it." Rowan slept through much of the afternoon and woke like a man who had held a body in a river. He looked smaller in Doc Green's spare bed and larger everywhere else. When Tamsin told him Lasker had tried to put paper on a flood and lost, he smiled without teeth. Good, he said. I don't mind losing blood for something that learns. You mind? She said softly, smoothing his mussed hair back with her wrapped hand. And you'll mind again if you do it twice this week. All right, he conceded. Once a week. His eyes found her palm. You stop hurting? She tilted her hand. The pain was a band now, not a bell. No, she said, but it has manners. Like you, he said. She sat on the edge of the bed and did not notice that her dress had not recovered from the river. Rowan, she said, I have something to say and I need a witness for it besides myself. That way I can't later pretend I didn't. He propped himself higher, head cocked like the dog's when it is very sure it understands every word. I'm here. When I came, she began, and the old story surged up like something embarrassed to be caught out in daylight. I believed a man in a letter. I believed him because he wrote like a person who knew the price of things. He said I should come quick and be grateful sooner. Then I arrived and discovered that he'd found another woman with a bigger dowry and a father who owed him nothing. He told me I was too poor to be a wife worth writing down. He made me feel like a fraction. Her breath hitched, and she made, It behave. I am done letting any man choose my denominator. Rowan's face changed in the way faces do when a man is mostly made of equanimity and then a cliffside cracks inside him anyway. Do you want me to find him? No. She said, surprised by how honest the word felt. I want you to stand with me in a church when I stand up of my own choosing. Maybe not today. Maybe when our river remembers we're partners. She peeked at his eyes and found them fierce with a gentleness that took out her knees from the inside. If you want me, he said, and it wasn't a question and it didn't need adornment. The want in it was not a boy's hunger. It was a man's consent. Tamsin Holt, I don't have a dowry for you, but I have ditches and a house that leaks in November and a town that thinks you're a weather change. I have a world that got larger the second you started measuring it with your hands. If you want that and my foolishness, say when. After the judge, she said. After the women get their money. After Lasker learns that he cannot count forever without paying. She smiled and felt the left corner of her mouth remember its childhood. After you stop getting shot for a whole month. A month, he agreed solemnly. Ambitious. Judge Whitfield Green arrived before supper in a buggy that had seen more arguments than weddings. He was hatless, which suggested he took the wind personally. He was also Edie's kin, and Edie's kin tended to improve when she was looking. The hearing was called in the church because the courtroom had not yet grown out of the ground, and justice has to sit somewhere. People packed the pews with a kind of sober exhilaration. Benton Lasker sat like a visiting dignitary who had been given the wrong chair on purpose. Caleb Stroud folded himself in 3 layers of composure. Ezekiel Baird held a Bible, as if hoping it would adopt him. Judge Green set his spectacles low. We'll proceed simply, he said. Sheriff, who's under arrest? 3, Greeley said, and named the foreman, Scarchin, and the powder man. 1 deceased, he added, nodding to the even man's absence. Confession taken. He produced a paper. It was clumsy, blood-stained, and spelled like a man who had left school when numbers started to look superior to letters. It was also the kind of paper that turns men pale. Read it, the judge said. Greeley read. The room listened. The words named Lasker the employer and listed amounts that had become evident in the main ledger of Townsin. Half now, half when. Water did what it was told and stopped feeding the inconvenient. The boy who had shot at the market was called the Cheap One. Tamsin's stomach lurched. She swallowed and decided to be angry tomorrow, so anger would not write the end of this line. Miss Holt, the judge said when the sheriff finished. I see your name here. You care to tell the court why? She rose. Her hands trembled once at her sides, and then stilled because they had work. Because I stood between a gun and a man twice, and because I threw water where powder wanted to. And because my name is in ledgers where it shouldn't be. She held up Stroud's page copies. Funds intended for me and other women who came here on letters were diverted to support Mr. Lasker's mill for nearly 3 weeks. Mr. Baird's store accepted goods on credit from that mill during the same period and set prices accordingly. She felt rather than saw Baird shrink. I am no lawyer, I am an accountant, and the numbers say theft even when the words don't like to. Mr. Stroud, the judge asked mildly. Stroud stood smoothly. Sometimes the bank... Answer. The accusation, the judge said, not loudly and not softly. Stroud swallowed. Maybe for the first time in his public life, he looked like a man who could imagine a smaller version of himself. Yes, he said, we held the remittances. We intended to replace them with interest when the mill's note cleared. It did not clear on time. We would have made the ladies whole. His gaze skittered like a trapped thing. Eventually, Mr. Baird, the judge said. Pastor Riggs asked me to repent, Baird said, and raised the Bible a little. I am thinking about it. Don't hurt yourself, Harlan murmured from the back. A few people laughed and then remembered courtrooms, are allergic to laughter even when they take nourishment from it. Judge Green leaned back. I will do 3 things, he said. First, I issue a temporary injunction against any modification of the headgate, channels, or the creek bed, pending a full hearing. Second, I order Mr. Stroud's bank to repay withheld remittances with interest by sundown today, and to produce a complete ledger of pass-through funds for my inspection. Third, I remand Mr. Lasker's 3 employees to county custody and set bond for the foreman and the shooter at a sum they cannot afford. He tapped the confession on the table. Mr. Lasker, step forward. Lasker did, with the lazy stride of a man who believes the world moves to his rhythm. Judge, you sit at the center of an ugly web, the judge said. I can't cut every strand today, but I can tie one knot. You will surrender your record books, private and business, to the sheriff by noon tomorrow. On what grounds? Lasker asked lightly. On the grounds that I am a judge, and I do not like being invited to a fire after somebody lit it in my county, Judge Green said, and on the grounds that if you do not, I will issue a bench warrant for your arrest, and have the pleasure of seeing if your hat still looks fine in a cell. A low sound ran through the pews. It sounded like relief teaching itself to speak in plural. Lasker smiled and showed a tooth that might have been charm in another life. Of course. He did not mean it. He meant to buy time with the exact coin he had minted for years, time and fear's old residuary goodwill. The judge rapped the Bible once with his knuckles. We're adjourned, he said, and the Lord have mercy on all of us if we forget we are neighbors before we are anything else. Stroud paid by sundown. The women came to the church and took their envelopes with faces that mixed anger and the kind of astonishment that follows after long droughts. Alma tucked hers into her bodice with the ceremony of a sacrament. Hester looked Stroud in the eye, like she was measuring him for a suit of unimportance. Ruth Calder counted hers 3 times and smiled each time as if to memorize the motion for future pleasure. Baird came late with a bouquet pilfered from his own stoop and an apology that mistook tone for repair. He got the tone right because Tamsin had helped engrave it into his ear at Pastor Riggs's desk. He did not get the repair. That would take years and perhaps a different town. Tamsin walked home with Alma and the dog. The creek song had a new note in it, a roughness that would take time to sand. The sky was that soft pewter that meant rain somewhere else and stories here. She was not gentle company. Her burns told her how to hold her elbows, and her ribs reminded her that some days you pay after you pay. But she felt something that had been stiff inside her for half a life, twitch and ease. Not safety, not yet. Place. Rowan was on the porch with 2 blankets and 3 kinds of stubborn. Doc said, "Sit," he said. "I am sitting," he said. "Rest," she said. "You are not resting." "Resting is in the eye of the woman scolding me," he said, and then sobered. "Judge?" "Angry," she said, in a useful way. She leaned against the porch rail and let the boards take one more person's weight, like they had been meant to. Lasker will stall. But he lost ground. Men like that are very bad at losing ground. It makes them careless. He nodded. "You scared?" "Yes," she said, and loved the way he accepted that like he accepted weather. "But I am louder today than the part of me that is afraid." He reached out. She took his hand. The dog pressed his head under their joined fingers, like a cause. Lasker tried 2 things in the night, and 1 at dawn. At night, he sent a pair of men to break into the sheriff's office and retrieve the confession. The dog woke Harlan, who woke Greeley, who woke the men with a shotgun and a lecture that filled the night with new language. At dawn, Lasker tried to ride out with half his ledgers. He discovered the judge had removed horses from his barn by legal sleight of hand that looked like magic and was only the plainest kind of law. By noon, the town was thick with the sound of rumors brushing each other's shoulders. Tamsin wrote, while she listened, names, amounts, who had eaten where and left owing what, words to be used only if necessary and written so that if she was killed, someone else could pick up the story and go on. It felt morbid. It felt also religious. The last trouble came at sundown. It was smaller than a headgate and nastier than dynamite. A man with a petition and a suit, sent from the railroad office in a town that believed itself proper. He brought paperwork to evict Tamsin from the Modest, room above the smithy she had rented the day she arrived, for non-payment. She stared at him for a long time, without blinking. Then she took the paper and folded it. "I paid," she said. She had receipts in a neat packet. She had dates and figures and a level gaze that did not need to be loud to be believed. "Not to the right person," the man said, and gestured. Over his shoulder, where a pale trio stood in disapproval, her original letter writer, the man who had rejected her, his new wife with the dowry, and the father-in-law whose money had seemed to right the moral. Everything went white inside her, and then the whiteness folded into a single, crisp line. She handed the paper to Harlan without looking. "You were in Kansas," she said to the man who had written her letters. "You said you had no money to fetch me. You said I would be a burden unless I learned to be less. You signed your name to all of it, like a man proud of being small." He had the gall to look pained. "I changed my mind." "You changed your fortunes," she said. "That is a different verb." Rowan stepped forward, but she put 2 fingers on his sleeve and stopped him. "No," she said. "I don't need a man to stand between me and a ghost I already buried." She turned back to the letter writer. "You did not want me when I was poor. I am still poor in money. I am wealthy in a thing you can't spend. This town will tell you the balance." She looked at Sheriff Greeley. "Sheriff, is my rent paid?" "It is," he said, "to the smith who owns the building. And does a man's letter give him the right to remove a woman from a roof because he regrets marrying his money instead of his word?" The judge had joined them. He removed his spectacles and polished them as if the action could clarify the gay world. "It does not," he said. "Petition denied." He looked the letter writer up and down with the efficient disdain of an uncle with high standards. "Go home. Pay your wife the courtesy of acting like you chose her." The man colored like a sunset no one had ordered and retreated. His wife looked at Tamsin and nodded once, something between apology and condolence and respect. Rowan exhaled slowly. "You didn't need me," he said. "I do," she said, and didn't realize until she had said it that it had risen from the same place as the other truths she'd been learning, not a confession and not a plea. Just a ledger entry with a plus where there had long been a 0. But not for that. What then? His smile was audacious and careful. For everything that comes after. The after arrived the next morning like weather finally choosing a season. Lasker turned up with his ledgers and a lawyer who smelled like paper kept in a damp drawer. The judge took the books without ceremony. Harlan stood at the door to the sheriff's office and did not need to touch the knife at his belt to make his point. Stroud hovered and tried to look like he had always intended to cooperate this much. Baird stayed away and sent a pie he had not baked, and no one ate. Tamsin sat at a long table with Edie and the judge and 3 women who did arithmetic for a living but had not been paid for it. They opened Lasker's books and spilled them like a river with no bank. The numbers lied and then confessed. They pointed like fingers at places where money went to buy men. Tamsin followed the flows as if they were tributaries and named each, one with the word it deserved: bribe, delay, fee, theft, pride. By afternoon, the judge had enough to issue warrants. He did. Lasker's face did something odd then. It didn't fall. Men like him don't fall, they rearrange. But it bent. He looked at Tamsin like she had done something to him he couldn't put in a line item. She met his gaze and let him see that she had, and that she wasn't sorry. He looked from her to Rowan, who stood in the doorway with his sling and his unreasonable love. "You'll never tame this town," Lasker said quietly, almost curious. "Taming is for animals," Tamsin said. "We will teach it to choose." He laughed once. "You're dangerous," he said. "Men will either follow you or try to break you." "They can line up," Alma said from the corner where she was pretending to mend and actually listening for trouble. "We'll feed the first and bury the second." Greeley led Lasker away. It was not the end of anything, just the part where men who had thought themselves irremovable learned that doors swing both to and fro. But it was an end to one chapter, and towns sometimes need a neat border, even when the book refuses to stay still. The wedding did not announce itself as a wedding at first. It came like a workday, fields to check, a sluice to inspect, a boy to teach the difference between mischief and experiment. Then at noon, Pastor Riggs stopped by the ranch with his thin mouth smiling as if it remembered a secret. He had a Bible and a sense that God enjoys being invited to things that are mostly human. Rowan was awkward in his Sunday shirt and stubborn even about combing hair. The dog's eyebrows arranged themselves into an opinion of decorum. Alma cried where no one could see and then came out and told everyone what to do twice. Harlan stood, with his hat in his hands, and looked at his friend like a man who had watched a land he loved survive a fire. Tamsin wore a dress the color of a good cloud and bandages the color of, you should have seen the other guy. She had one new scar and a heart that had learned to lay down next to someone else's beating and not count it as a loss. "Do you promise," Pastor Riggs said, "to be partners in work and in weather?" "Yes," Tamsin said, and heard her own voice steady across the yard like a plank laid true. "Do you promise," he asked Rowan, "to stop getting shot?" Rowan glanced at Tamsin, who raised one eyebrow with the authority of a foreman who has seen your hands and knows when you're lying. "I will try," he said gravely. "That's as close as men get," Alma muttered and sniffed. They said the rest. They said it not because the words were magic, but because saying them in front of people who love you is the best way to make a map. When it was done, and the dog had finally permitted his head to be patted by everyone who needed the blessing, the town ate, because joy is hungry. That evening, when the light went a soft honey, Tamsin and Rowan stood at the mouth of the rebuilt headgate. The creek slid through the slats with a sound like an agreement finally honored. The fields beyond looked like they had opinions again. "I have something for you," Rowan said, and she braced for a brooch or a new ledger pencil and was surprised by neither. He handed her a small tin, her balm tin polished. Inside, laid flat, was a tiny scrap of charred fuse. "I kept the piece you kept," he said. "We can put it on the shelf above the stove, next to the coin Alma pressed in your hand." To remember that some things need fire to be avoided, and some need it to be changed. She closed her fingers around it and felt the old heat, now dead and useful. "All right," she said, "but next to it, I'm putting a list of the men we forgave, so I don't forget the difference between justice and revenge when the river runs low." He kissed the top of her head. He did it very gently, as if her hair had made new vows. "Do you ever think," he asked, "about the letter that got you here?" "Every day," she said. "I think of it, and then I think of the one I'm writing. To the girl I was. It says, 'You will be told you are too poor. You will almost believe it. Then you will step off a train into a town full of men who need a spine and women who have six. You will count. You will bake. You will refuse. You will get wet absolutely everywhere. And a man will give you the world, but only because you will already have learned how to carry it. You will say yes because you like the work." He laughed, which had become one of the ways she counted her blessings. "Will you show me that letter when you finish it?" "No," she said, "but I'll read it out loud at breakfast whenever the wind comes from the wrong direction." "In that case, I'll buy more coffee," he said gravely, "and maybe a new roof." "Maybe," she agreed, and threaded her fingers through his. Downstream, the town's lamps came on one by one, like a census agreeing with itself at last. A rider came up the road then, fast but not in danger. Sheriff Greeley had tilted back, grin trying on an unfamiliar width. "Judge signed the final orders," he called, waving papers. "Lasker's out of the bank. Stroud's on probation with numbers I can read. Baird's teaching Sunday school. Until he learns the commandments in a voice that doesn't insult God." He reined in at the gate. "We won." Tamsin thought of the river, the salt, the boy with hunger in his dare, the women with envelopes that weighed more than money. She thought of Rowan's hand on the rope and Harlan's knife-finding bone, of Alma's prayer that wasn't a prayer, and the judge's spectacles slipping down his nose while he did the right thing anyway. She breathed. It filled her. It was more than breath. It was a whole life of air. "No," she said, smiling until it frightened her a little in the best way. "We began." She turned to Rowan. He was looking at her like a man who had been lost a long time and was tired enough to admit it. She tipped her head to the right, and he understood, and they walked home, and the dog trotted ahead like a punctuation mark. That meant continue. On the kitchen shelf, the tin took its place next to Alma's coin, and a new thing, a scrap of paper with 3 words in a hand that had learned to be certain. Count. Refuse. Love. They ate the stew Alma had left with the same seriousness they had given to court and fire. After they sat in the doorway and watched the star-salted dark pour itself over the ranch and the creek and the town. Tamsin leaned her head on Rowan's shoulder and listened to his breath, and let herself be exactly as rich as she was. For a while there were no words. Then a wind shifted, and she felt a letter writing itself in the marrow of her. She closed her eyes and smiled at the page. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.